Welcome to the Create Your Happy podcast, where conscious female creators come together with a shared vision to inspire and empower women as they learn how to fully embrace their humanness, find their unique voice, and collaborate on how together we can change the world. I'm your host, Christy Holt, happiness coach and conscious funpreneur on a mission to change the world one beautiful soul at a time. All right, gorgeous, it's time to get curious and become inspired. It's time to create your happy. Welcome to this episode of Create Your Happy. I am so excited to have with us today Heidi Dunstan, who is a certified grief educator, passionate about helping others to learn about both grief and legacy. Welcome to the show, Heidi. I'm super excited, although this can be a bit of a heavy topic, but I know that your bubbly and loving personality is going to shine through and give us some insights that we might not even expect today. So I'm really excited to dive into this. So welcome to the show. I would love for you to share a little bit about your story of overcoming and how you got to where you are today. I know that this is usually a big piece of, the reasons why people are passionate about doing the things they are, because it ties into their personal story. So I would love to hear from you. Welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks so much for having me, Christy. Really excited to be here. And yeah, the topic is a little heavy, but it's one that's important. I lost my husband unexpectedly in 2018. He had a massive heart attack 2 days after Christmas and the day before my 40th birthday. And literally in an hour, my life turned upside down and inside out. And I have an amazing support system. I have great people around me, lots of good friends and family. And what I found in my grieving process after losing him is that a lot of people either said things that missed the mark, that really didn't land very well, or they just went completely silent. And I lost them. They were just gone. Yeah. And that silence became really loud in my life a few months after he passed. And as I spent more and more time with grievers and more time with widows, I found that this was a common occurrence amongst all of us. And I realized that the people that around me that went quiet and the people that said things that didn't land well, it wasn't because they were being malicious or that they had it in for me. It's because they've never been taught. We don't talk
didn't know differently, right?
Yeah.
Haven't been told the proper way, and everyone's grief journey can be so incredibly different. And I think that what a lot of people do is avoid saying anything because they don't know what to say. So
Exactly.
I'm really excited for you to share a lot about how we can overcome that as, a friend or a confidant to someone who has lost someone, and how we can help them to move through that confidently from our own standpoint, how we can hold space for them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the important part is so many of us don't know what to say. Yeah. And we're so afraid that we're going to say the wrong thing that it seems easier to say nothing at all.
Yeah.
And my program, I call it Lean Into Grief. And I believe that when those moments you feel like you shouldn't say anything, or you should run away, or you should cross the street so you don't see that person, those are the moments when you're meant to lean in. Those are the moments when you're meant to stop in and say, hey, you're on my mind, you're on my heart. I want you to know that you're important to me. Or heck, I know I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say, but I know you're hurting. And it can make such a big difference to actually say that to somebody instead of nothing. Yeah. Because so many friendships and relationships end when there's grief because people are just walking on eggshells.
Yeah. Well, we haven't been taught, it hasn't been part of our education to be taught how to handle uncomfortable emotions, neither our own. And therefore, if we can't sit with our own uncomfortable emotions, we certainly don't have the skills to sit and deal with other people's uncomfortable emotions. And that's just a major shortcoming. I don't know if it's the education system. It's just generationally, it hasn't been taught to us. It is not a skill that's been stressed enough for us to have that emotional intelligence to be able to sit with what feels uncomfortable. Rather, we live in a world where we push it away, we push it aside, we try to ignore it, we try to avoid it. We're doing everything in our power to not feel it. Yeah. When what we truly need is to actually allow it and to feel it so that it can pass, so that it can move through, right? And we can move beyond that discomfort and continue creating our life.
Yeah. And I think the hard part too is that griefs as individuals are fingerprint. So none of us grieve the same. And it's really hard because we can sometimes look at somebody and go, man, all they do is cry. Or, oh, they've been crying for 6 months. Like, when are they going to get over it?
Yeah.
Or they're not crying at all. And there's a lot of judgment around grief, and there's a lot of judgment around pain.
Yeah.
And the reality is we don't judge how people are happy. We don't judge how they celebrate. If you think of America's Got Talent, when they hit the golden buzzer, do the people who get the golden buzzer celebrate the same? One might curl up in a ball, another might have like a feeling with their creator. You see some people running around the stage. You see some people crying, and we never judge them ever when they're happy, but we judge people when they're in pain. And it's because we aren't comfortable dealing with painful emotions in our society. We want to often suppress them, which is when oftentimes people use platitudes like, oh, they're in a better place, or at least they're not suffering now, or you can have more children, or things like that. And those are when things start to miss the mark and go off the rails.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got to, approach with some awareness, right, of what's coming up for us before we communicate. Because if we aren't careful, we can end up projecting out of our own position, which might not be the place that we truly want to be in.
Totally. And I believe a lot of times, because we don't live in this world that handles grief and pain very well, when all of a sudden we come across somebody who is grieving, that griever ends up carrying more grief because the person is like, oh, somebody's grieving. I get to talk to them about my grandma who died 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And they kick that door open because they haven't dealt with their own stuff. And so all of a sudden a griever, just the walls go up, and they feel like they have to armor up to go out and deal with people. They can't be open and be like, I'm hurting. I don't need any more hurt.
Yeah.
I'd love to go for coffee and talk about the weather because my world doesn't make sense. And so it's about getting intentional and really seeing the person right in front of you and being able to hold that space without judgment, without expectation, and with some grace. Because I can tell you, after my husband died, Mike died, my memory was terrible. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't myself. And I needed people around me to have some grace, because I needed people to understand that I was forgetting things. I wasn't eating properly. I didn't have the focus and the acuity that I usually do. And people had to remember that I wasn't the same. Like, I had a lot more on my plate. And those that held that grace for me stayed in my inner circle.
Yeah.
But those that didn't, they got pushed away pretty quick because I couldn't handle it. I didn't have any more to put on my plate.
Right. When you're operating from such a bare minimum survival function, there is no space for any of that extra stuff that is ending up piling on. You need space to think through and process without any confusion from the outside world, right? Because we all do process it in our own unique way. And having those distractions and those outer perceptions just kind of tends to muddy the water and prevents you from moving through as smoothly as you might without it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I can give you some examples, like business-wise. I own my own business. And I think it was about 3 days after my husband's funeral, I got an email from a client. The list of things for Heidi to do is growing. Are you able to take on the list, or should I find somebody else? That was an easy response. Find someone else.
Yeah.
Whereas if the question would have been, hey, I know you've got a lot on your plate right now, wondering where things are at business-wise for you, that conversation could have been a lot different.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I severed ties. I've never spoken to that woman ever again, because I was like, how insensitive.
Right.
But I had other amazing clients that were like, hey, Heidi, like, what do you need? We know you still need to run your business, but we know that things are different and very different. So tell us how to best support you.
Yeah.
And those conversations can make such a big difference. And that's the same thing with your friends and your family. It's that, hey, what can I do best to support you, rather than the call me if you need me.
Yeah.
Right?
Those vague sort of, You want to be supportive. And again, I think, like we said at the beginning, it's not that people are trying to be assholes about it or anything. They don't know how to be. They don't know what to say or what to offer. And often the person who's grieving doesn't know what they need either, right? So you're in this sort of space of like nobody quite knows what's going on and everyone's trying to make it bearable instead of just sitting with it.
Yeah. And I totally agree. I think it's one of those things where people, the words matter.
Yeah.
They really do. And we say, we have things in our society that we say, like the I'm sorry for your losses, which never makes sense to a lot of people. And as I'm spending more and more time with people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and even in their 60s, they're like, I never liked that phrase.
Mm.
And it doesn't make sense. So what can I say differently? And I'm like, acknowledge the pain. Acknowledge, hey, I see you're hurting. I see this is hard. My heart goes out to you. You're important to me, and I'm holding space. Can be such a different conversation rather than, I'm sorry for your loss. And literally, I would purse my lips and say thanks. And the conversation stopped because there was nothing left to say.
Yeah.
You know, and when all of a sudden you can hold that space and say, hey, I'm here for you. If you want to talk or if you want to hear some stories about your loved one that I remember, the conversation can be of connection and love and grace together rather than somebody going home and crying by themselves day in and day out.
Yeah. And I think the same is true of any struggle and any challenge when you're seeking that support. When you reach out, we don't always know what it is we need. So there is always that first problem. But it's also not always because we want someone to fix it or take it away. It's often because we just want to be seen and to know that we're not alone. And so I think that's very relevant to day-to-day struggles and challenges as well in relationships and friendships and any sort of relationship, really, to acknowledge that we don't always have the answers, because we don't. We very rarely have all the answers, actually. And we don't always have the solution, and we're not always able to fix the thing. But even just in sitting with that and saying, listen, I know this is really tough for you, and I don't have any answers. I wish there was something I could do. I don't know what that is a lovely space to be in. It's very honest, it's very open, and it invites the other person to share open and honestly as well, right? So that's where we're going to have a much more positive dynamic, which allows space for even that uncomfortable part to come up and to be looked at.
Yeah. And even if you don't know what to do, it's like, be specific and say, hey, I'm going to get groceries today. Do you need me to pick anything up for you? Or I'm driving the kids to school. Can I grab your kids too? And offer specific stuff, because lots of times their head hasn't even thought about groceries. Their head hasn't even thought about, oh, I got to get the kids to school tomorrow morning. And sometimes just that break might be great for them, or it might be like, hey, no, getting the kids to school gets me out of bed because it's hard to get out of bed when you've had a loss. But I really could use some help getting the snow shoveled or getting the garbage out or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And, it could open that dialogue up. And it really does make a difference when somebody feels like they've got their back. And that, the hard part with grief is what happens is when we see that somebody's grieving, somebody often will say, oh, I understand grief. I went through divorce like a week after my husband died. I'm like, grief. Yeah. Divorce is grief, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
We try to find commonalities, but those commonalities often minimize. And so it's not like I can say, well, you lost your mom while my goldfish died. That's like saying I lost my arm and you got a paper cut. Like, they're not the same.
Yeah.
And they really minimize. And so oftentimes if I want to try to find a way to connect, is somebody might have lost a parent and I'll say losing a parent is so hard.
Yeah.
And then they go, have you lost a parent before? Yeah, I lost my dad. And then it's a dialogue of, okay, we're on the same level. Now, the tricky part is we compare And so it's like, whose loss is bigger? Don't go there. It doesn't matter. Loss is loss,
I
you
think
know?
that's a really important piece to remember in that we're all so different. So we can't really compare how we process, how we move through, what actions we take, what feelings we feel. It could be a whole hot mess that might make no sense to anybody else, but it's the perfect way for you to move through. And as well, comparing ourselves to other situations or to other people's stories is just a terrible, terrible place to be in uh, for anything, because you are not meant to be someone else. You are you. You are unique and special and created perfectly imperfect, just as you are. So, wanting to experience things or compare things or create things that are just like someone else is going to
Yeah.
be a miss, anyways.
Well, and I agree. And I think that, the hard part too is every circumstance is different when it
Yeah.
comes to grief. Like, some people, they've got estate issues, they've got other issues, they've got custody issues, they've got all sorts of crazy stuff that adds on top of that. They have financial issues. Like I went from a double income home to a single income overnight,
Yeah.
right? And so every circumstance is so different. And so when we can just say, hey, I understand losing a parent, or I understand the pain. I don't understand your pain,
Yeah.
but I understand. I've gone through that loss. It evens the playing field without it feeling like a back and forth battle, right?
And
And
even
it doesn't.
if you haven't experienced something similar, we don't necessarily need, we actually don't at all need to experience something similar in order to listen to
Agree.
someone else's experience. So we think that empathizing means that we need to understand, and maybe we've been there and that we have had those feelings before we can really empathize. But the truth is, we just need to sit down and listen, because no amount of your past assumptions or experiences, emotions, beliefs, any of that is going to tell you a single thing about how someone else is experiencing something right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, we also need to remember that people often think that grief's linear and that we get
Mm,
better with time, and it doesn't. It sometimes gets worse and harder. And so knowing what worked one day may not work the next,
yeah.
and being okay with that, being like, hey, I see today's a harder day. Anniversaries, things like that, those can be really hard days, and they can be hard for a long time. And giving the people the grace to go, I see it's a hard day, you know, instead of, aren't you over it by now? Oh, that still bothers you? I mean, I was just chatting with a friend who lost her husband 9 months ago, and her neighbor said to her, why are you still wearing your wedding rings? And she's like, because I'm still married. My husband's just in heaven,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, well, who are you to judge?
Right.
You know? And the reality is like us everyday people, it's hard enough. You think about the medical professionals out there, they're not even really well trained either.
Yeah.
I was chatting with a widow not that long ago who she lost her husband unexpectedly 9 months ago. She's a young widow. She's like 35 years old. And the doctor said to her at her last visit, you take the prize for grieving the hardest out of all my patients. And it's like, why would you say that to a patient? Like, these are our medical professionals. They don't even know the right thing to say either. So when people come to it and they're like, this is hard, it's hard for everybody. It's a
Yeah.
sticky conversation where the words matter and how we say them, when we say them, they all matter. And when you do say something that misses the mark, my best suggestion is own it.
Yeah.
That came out wrong. I'm sorry. This is awkward and I'm doing the best. And I just need you to know I don't know what to say and you're important to me.
Yeah. I think being open to admitting that things don't always come out the way we intend, and that sometimes, despite our best intentions, things don't land the way that we hope, right? So there's always two parties in any communication, and sometimes even with the best intentions, what you are saying is not received in the way you anticipate, right? And so there's always got to be in conscious relationships, this space of, I'm going to fuck up from time to time. I'm going to say stuff that's going to come out wrong, or that you're going to misinterpret or misunderstand. And you might read this completely in a different way than I meant for it to be. But having that space and that grace for ourselves and for others really, really creates a nice space where you can actually be free to be yourself
Yeah.
and have those difficult conversations, hold space, and give people the love that they truly need. Ultimately, when we make a mistake, what we need in that moment, my gosh, is not a bunch of guilt or shame or lambasting. What we need is actually a lot of love and compassion. And because from that space, when we be like, oh my gosh, yeah, I really made a mistake and that's not what I intended, man, then we're shifting into solution sort of seeking mode. Whereas if we are just beating ourselves up, well, first of all, we're spending way too much time focusing on ourselves, not really giving compassion to the other people or addressing their feelings in that situation. But it keeps us stuck in that problem focused zone instead of allowing ourselves that grace and compassion and then growing and moving through it and learning to do better. Ultimately, that's what the life goal is here, is to, make mistakes and make them often, but to learn from them so we don't keep making the same ones over and over.
Exactly. And it has to be on both sides. It has to be the griever has to say, hey, like that kind of missed the mark.
Yeah.
Because lots of times what a griever does is they can't handle it. They don't want another sticky conversation. They live them right now.
Yeah.
And so if somebody's important to them, they need to say, hey, that one hurts. And, and just know that the relationship has to have that back and forth.
Yeah.
Otherwise the barriers go up and the relationship changes. And so I encourage grievers to also say, hey, like, I need you to call more often because I'm mishearing, like I'm lonely or I'm this, and asking for what they want, because it's important to be able to, it can't just be on the supporters either. It's got to be both sides, right?
Yeah. And I think that's probably a big challenge. I think in general, we have been told, taught, conditioned, however you want to look at it, to be very self-sufficient and to not ask for help, because that places our reliance on other people, and we don't want to be reliant on other people. We don't want to be a burden, for God's sakes. So we don't ask for what we truly need, and we're doing everyone a disservice because we're not getting what we want or need because we're not asking for it. And people are not having the opportunity to help give you that thing that you want or need. And people really want, they genuinely want to help you. They want to serve you. They want to help you to feel happier or create better experiences or sit with your uncomfortable ones. They want to help you, but you sometimes need to help them help you, right? Like, help me help you.
Exactly. And I think, the hard part too is that our worlds live in different pieces. We have our home life and our friends and our family. We maybe have our church, and we maybe have work, things like that, kids stuff. And so we have these different places and spaces where we have different people that are coming to us and wanting to support us or not wanting to support us. And so it can be really tricky to manage all of that. And keeping in mind that we live in this pain adverse culture. So we always try to find the silver lining or trying to find platitudes to make something bad not bad. And those platitudes in all those different areas of life can be really condescending. So at least they're not suffering anymore. Well, the person right in front of you is suffering, right? And so I never say it. I mean, I had a friend of mine, her husband passed of ALS, which is a horrible disease to die from. It was when she said, I'm glad I don't have to see him suffer anymore. That was like, I'm glad you're able to see that. But it wasn't for me to say, because she's in agony.
Yeah.
At least they're with God now, right? Well, I don't want them with God. I want them with me, right?
Yeah.
So my friends with the strongest faith, I never bring God up until they do. Because when you lose somebody you love, you can be really mad at God. Yeah. Sometimes it can be part of your process. And it isn't for me to tell you that God's made it all better.
Yeah.
Right. And then when people use these at least statements, they're they're platitudes that just really minimize the person right in front of you and how they're feeling. Because in those early days, weeks, and months of loss, there is no understanding of why. There is no understanding of um, what has happened. They just miss their person,
Yeah.
and that's the reality. And even depending on the circumstances, like if it was a loss by suicide or a loss by an accident or a crime, those at least statements just don't even fit. And we
Yeah.
try to force them, like it's like a puzzle piece that doesn't fit. It feels that hard to actually say it and feel that not being able to be received. It can be really complicated.
Yeah. And I think too, people have their expectations around how you're going to respond. Uh, but there is no one way to respond. And I think the fact is, no amount of knowledge leading up to something prepares you for the actual event itself. When my dad passed away, you know, I can't say it was a complete shock out of left field. He had had heart problems for a couple of decades. It wasn't a complete and utter shock when he had another heart attack and passed away. But there was still no way of preparing for that. And I think that no matter how much time maybe you have even leading up where you think maybe you could be preparing for that outcome, there is just no way to really prepare for that outcome. It is a shock and a surprise no matter where it comes from.
Yeah. Well, because we love people,
Yeah.
we don't want them to go. So as much as even if somebody's in hospice or in palliative care, we know that they're dying, but the day they die is a traumatic day, right? And it's that day. I always say to people, if you were alive during 9/11, you know where you were, what you were eating, what you were wearing, what you were doing. The day somebody dies, it's important to you. If you were there, that's even if you got the phone call,
Yeah.
that day is etched in your being, just like 9/11 is for so many people around the world. And we don't really think about it that way, right? We don't really understand that. And so even when we're supporting grievers in those early hours and days and weeks of grief, what people do, hey, so and so's passed away. Oh, what did he die from?
Right.
Then we force them to go back to that day. We force them to have to tell that story over and over again. And the reality is, does that story serve the person you're supporting? No,
No.
it doesn't. It's a curiosity thing. We as humans want to know what they died of. And with COVID, it's like we try to just minimize how death works, right?
Mhm.
Oh, they died of COVID. Oh, millions of people around the world died of COVID.
Like that whole narrative has just like ripped my heart out some millions of times in the last couple of years, because every single one of those people meant the world to someone in their world.
Yeah.
And minimizing that loss because it doesn't directly affect you shows a complete lack of compassion, right?
Yeah. But that's how people try to disconnect from
Yeah.
pain.
Yep.
Oh, it's normal. Like people dying of cancer is normal now. Well, it's not normal for somebody who's had to live it, who's had to watch their person. I love seeing where people that can just hold that space and say, hey, I see this hurts, and it doesn't matter whether it was expected or unexpected. About 9 months after my husband died, I had to go, he was a fireman, and I had to go to a dinner where him and other fallen firefighters had passed. And a gentleman was sitting at a table with me, and he said, "You're Mike Wilson's widow?" And I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "I saw him a week before he died, and he was so happy, and he was so excited about this new life that the two of you guys had together. And then a week later, I got an email that he died." And he's like, and I was just devastated because I just saw him. And he's like, "May I ask what he died from?" It wasn't what was the cause of death or how did he die. It was, "May I ask?"
Yeah.
And because that man had just seen him, I was willing to be open with him. But so many people just expect, like, and people that didn't know Mike, they wanted to know. And it was like, can you, how does that answer help? Like, you have a magic wand and you can bring them back to life?
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
reality is,
it's about satisfying their own curiosity. It's about sometimes justifying. I feel like a lot of times you'll see these odd responses to, even news articles or stories about maybe children, and people really want to understand so that they can distance themselves from that possibility. And that's just about safety. That's again wanting to create safety. Oh, that was a freak accident. That can never happen to me or my loved one. Now I can breathe. Right. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the people that are affected, the people who are grieving. It's a survival mechanism.
how many people read obits trying to figure out, oh, donate to the Heart and Stroke Foundation, donate to the Cancer Foundation, or even the way it's worded, oh, that sounds like it was by suicide.
Yeah.
We read those because our morbid curiosity wants it,
Yeah.
which is fine. Read it that way. That's for you. But when you start asking somebody who is actually so close to that loss, that cause of death, it is not supporting them.
Yeah.
And there's just ways, if somebody's telling me that somebody's passed and, I want to give them the opportunity to open up, I may say, was the loss unexpected?
Yeah.
And that then they know. And not that there's a difference between expected and unexpected, like we talked about
Right.
earlier, but it at least opens the door to say to them, if they'd like to share, they can.
Yeah.
Because some people as grievers, they need to, and others, it's a really traumatic day.
Yeah.
And so, and everybody is different. And so I want people to feel like they can open up if they choose to, but I don't ever want to force them to go back to that day.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be really re-traumatizing to have to tell your story over and over and over.
And it's exhausting.
Yeah.
Right. And at a time in those early days and months and weeks of grief, like you're not sleeping, you're hardly eating. I mean, I lost 30 pounds in 3 months. Now I got some weight to lose, Christy. Don't get me wrong. Like it wasn't a bad thing. But so many people were commenting on how great I looked. I had one friend go, is it because you're not eating?
Yeah.
And just, I'd like to have you over for dinner. Can I bring dinner over or whatever, right? Like just she acknowledged the fact that your life is different and it's got to suck not having your husband to eat with.
Yeah.
And I had zero focus to be able to cook more than one pot on the stove because I was burning stuff, right? And then I'd go to put the dishes away and my car keys were in the dishwasher. Like that's how messed up my brain was. And so for somebody to see me and go, okay, you've dropped 2 pant sizes. There's a problem here. It isn't that like, yeah, you look good, but we know this isn't for the right reason.
Yeah.
And it can make such a big difference to allow somebody to be seen that way.
Yeah.
Without it being condescending, without it being going like, what's wrong with you? It's like,
Right.
hey, I see that there's might be an issue here. Is there something I can support with?
Yeah.
Right. And in those, we're really good at, our society is really good at flocking to a griever in those early days and weeks. But a week or two after the funeral, the world gets quiet fast. Everybody goes back to living their normal. And I get that. I'm guilty of that too. But there's some really cool things that we can do. There's a website called mealtrain.com where we can go in and schedule meals. And so they could last a lot longer than those first couple weeks.
Yeah.
That site, you can pay $10 and all of a sudden it could be scheduling kids to go to and from school. Or maybe if there was an accident and multiple people in different hospitals, it could be visitation stuff or chores at the house, things like that, where people can sign up and be like, hey, we still want to help out. And that is a super cool tool because create a profile, and then you can send the link out to your little league. You can send it to your church or your work people, and people can feel like they can connect. And it's also great because people have to put in what they're going to bring for food, so you don't end up with 17 lasagnas. Because that's always fun. As a single woman, 17 lasagnas, don't recommend it.
It's the easiest, obvious answer, right? Is lasagna. It's the whole meal in one. But yeah, you certainly don't need to eat that 17 days in a row.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Or have 17. Like a friend of mine, she lost her husband 15 years ago. She threw away after her husband died, probably about 6 months after, she threw away 15, it was like a certain meal. And she was like, everybody thought because I have kids, they would love this. And she had 15 of them. And she's like, and we ate a bunch. So we had more than
Yeah.
15. Right. And so meal train is nice because people put in what they want. When people go to click on a day, they can see what's coming that week, which is awesome. And then also people send it in their grandma's vintage, like Corningware or Pyrex. And it's like, just put it in the dollar store, like tin cans, so that somebody doesn't have to try to figure out where it
Right.
goes after,
They don't
right?
have to remember whose container it was, and they don't have to worry about getting that back to you. Just toss it in the bin.
Keep it simple, right? And
Yeah.
it's amazing. Like, you can tell when somebody really wants to be in that inner circle of grief. A really good friend of mine, he actually lived across the street from me, and he he stood by while the firefighters worked on my husband in the driveway and was holding me and cheering Mike on, and doing what he needed to do as a friend. He was just amazing. And the next day was my birthday, and he came and knocked on the door, and instead of bringing flowers, he brought a Costco-sized pack of really good Kleenex.
Mm.
He's like, "You don't need flowers right now. Like, I know you. You're a sprinkler. Like, the faucet's running, right?" Like, so, you know, and in that moment, as much as the time was such a hard time, it brought a little bit of levity to the world, right? In our world that day, just to think outside the box and do something a little bit different, and go, hey, like he even said, like, we lived in a townhouse. He goes, I know you have lots of people staying by the house. Leave your garbage on the doorstep and we'll pick it up and take it to the bin. And so it doesn't need to be the big stuff. We don't have to go in and save the day. It could be those little spaces and places that just make a world of difference in a moment
Yeah.
that can really be memorable. I mean, I'm 3.5 years out and I still remember him doing that stuff. It really does make a difference. So I encourage people to help. I encourage people to put in the calendars birthdays, anniversaries. I call the day Mike died his wing anniversary, the day he got his wings. I put those in calendars on a yearly recurrence, and reach out and say, hey, thinking about you today. You know, to reach out to you on Father's Day, saying, hey, sending you a hug. I know that it can't always be easy not having your dad here.
Yeah.
Can make such a world of difference to say, somebody remembers, somebody knows that today isn't easy for me. Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, that's where the grace comes in. That's where the beauty and the connection comes in. And that's when it shows us, like, people get upset that, oh, grief, you should be done grief by now. But I believe grief is love.
Yeah.
So I will grieve my husband to the last breath I take because I will love him to the last breath I take.
Yeah.
And so when we look at grief that way and go, when there's deep grief, it's because they love deeply.
Yeah.
It wouldn't hurt if they didn't love them,
That's absolutely right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, grief is just about remembering and missing that person. And you'll never stop loving them just because you've spent more time not together. You'll always have those memories, those experiences, and that love.
And I think that's the hard part about grief, is that so many people don't know what to say and they don't say anything. And grievers often feel and are worried that those memories are going to slip away, and that they're not going to be talked about and they're not going to be remembered. And so when we share them with somebody, it can allow for really important spaces and places to go, that person still makes a difference. That person still has a legacy. That person is still impacting people. And it can be a really beautiful place. Now, do it with some grace. I have people that wanted to share with me, and I was just about to go and teach a class, and I'm like, dude, I know this is going to make me cry. So can
Yeah.
we do this after?
Yeah.
Like, you know, um, understanding that just because it might not be the right time doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. It just might not be that moment, right?
Yeah.
But those are important places and spaces where we can honor our people, carry on legacies. It's that, hey, do you have mom's cinnamon bun recipe? Can we keep making those because I miss that,
Yeah.
right? It's that, oh, I still work on dad's old cars because I love that time. Those things are important. I have a friend. I always have an orchid in my house because that's what my grandma always had, right?
Yeah. And those special ways of keeping their memory alive in your day to day can really bring, some of that love back into your heart every day when you see that and remember those amazing memories that you held and those experiences you shared. Just keeps them alive for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to share a little bit more about the work that you're doing, the programs that you have that I know are helping a lot of people really, really come through their difficult times with this grace and this compassion and love for themselves and for others. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about what you have going on.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, I run a free masterclass called Lean Into Grief, where I teach people what to say and not say. I am looking at building it into an online course to take. And then I also have just started a brand new course on legacy and talking about encouraging people to think about legacy and what their person that they've maybe lost, what their legacies are, so that we don't lose those memories. But also, are you living the life you want today for the legacy that you will leave behind when it's your time to go? And, when you think about life that way, it really does force us to live quite intentionally. And I
Yeah.
can tell you, when somebody loses somebody, their legacy piece changes. They look at life sometimes a little bit different, like tomorrow's not promised, so let's live for today.
Yeah, there absolutely is something in being faced with death that really, really forces us to face, our mortality, right? And create for ourselves more of what we do want because we aren't guaranteed beyond this moment, right? And so what we are guaranteed is right here, right now. And what we do have the power to do is to create those experiences that we desire in this moment that honors those people that we love, that honors ourselves, and that goes towards creating that legacy that we feel passionate about creating. So,
Exactly.
yeah. Where can our listeners find you online?
You can find me at HeidiDunstan.ca, HeidiDunstan.ca. I also have Facebook and Instagram at Lean Into Grief. And sometimes you'll find me on Clubhouse doing some rooms. And my website has some great tools. There's a toolkit there. Check the events page. I usually run a free class once a month.
Okay.
And it's free to anybody, and you're welcome to take it. I have people that have taken my masterclass like 3 times because it's just so full of great info.
Yeah. And I know there's always more to be learned in this area of grief and compassion, and even as far as self love and acceptance, tying into that legacy, becoming the creator of your own experience, your own life, your happiness, your success, your, you know, abundance, your peace, whatever it is that you seek to create in your world, that is up to you. And you, every single day is a fresh opportunity to go out there and create it. I would love to hear from you any practical tools or tips that you might want to share with the listeners and how they can navigate maybe some of those more difficult times, yet still remember their power to create the experiences that they desire.
Yeah. So if you're grieving, allow yourself to move through those emotions. For me, I often blocked those emotions in my early days and saying, why am I going through this? And the why stopped me. Know that those emotions are normal. And when you can sit with them and realize that they're normal and that they're love, you will be able to move through them with a little bit more grace. And
Yeah.
for those supporting somebody who's grieving, just let down the judgment. Judgment is grief's kryptonite, I believe. And just love people where they're at and allow them to be who they need to be in that moment, and do it without that judgment, and give them the grace that they need from you and that they deserve.
Yeah. You know what? Ultimately, that is top notch, solid advice for anybody, anywhere, at any point in time. When you can approach another with unconditional love and acceptance, man, that is when they are going to step up and they are going to grow and flourish like they never have before. Because ultimately, that is exactly what we need in our lives in order to live the fulfilled experiences that we want. We need to know that we're okay, that we are going to be safe, that we are going to be loved and accepted. And oftentimes we'll wear masks, or we'll hide, or we'll try to do the things that we think is going to make another person happy. But the truth is, the more love and acceptance we can give both to ourselves and to others, the more space we are creating for that growth. So, yeah. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and so many great ideas as far as how we can just step up and be there for those while they're grieving, and as well to know that it's absolutely okay to experience all kinds of things when we are grieving ourselves. So thank you so much for being here and sharing on this very important topic today.
Thanks so much, Christy. I appreciate you having me here.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. I trust you were inspired to take back your power and create your happy. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share the show with women in your life who could use a little extra inspiration today. If you'd like to connect with myself and/or today's guest, you can find those details in the show notes. We would love to hear from you. If you've got an inspiring story to share, you can also apply to be a guest on the show at createyourhappy.ca. As always, get out there, have fun, be you, and create your happy.